I want to talk about the technology of distinctions. I'm Dane Rose, and I'd like you to use the metaphor of the human body. And since I don't have fancy graphic equipment, let's use mine. Now, if we're to say blanket statements about this body, it's difficult. We could say, for example, this body is in darkness, but right now it's in light, and so that would be inaccurate. It would be useless information. And the way to look at distinctions are a technology of using language to connect more and more effectively with reality, which is always bigger than the distinctions. Now, what I mean by that is this body is ultimately broken down into subatomic particles. But we don't have the mental grasping ability to track all the subatomic particles and all the bits of units of space, etc. In fact, we could blow up just the shape of this body, magnify it and magnify it and magnify it and magnify it to such a size that it would take the conscious mind more than a lifetime to register bit by bit by bit. I see this bit, now I see this bit, now I see this bit is space between the atom of this bit of it. I mean, you can blow a shape up really big. So what we're looking at with distinctions is what's the right zoom-in point to where we can effectively engage with reality through the lens of distinctions. We're not actually engaging with reality because reality is too big. Reality is too complex. But we're engaging with a model of reality through language that is, if it's at the right zoom-in and the right level of complexity, is useful. Useful in building a relationship with that reality. So if you want to build a relationship with my body, we first look at different dimensions. You know, this is part, so we've got the height dimension, the width dimension, the depth dimension. Now this is really important. If you're going to be using a dentist drill on this body, and you have any of those dimensions off, you have this dimension right, and you have this dimension right, but you don't have the depth dimension right, and you drill into the wrong tooth. Or there isn't a tooth there at all. It's all the way back into the brain. You can kill the body by not having that distinction. Now, if we have the height, width, depth distinctions clear, if we don't add in the space-time dimension so that we know where this body is, in GPS in relationship to the drill and other bodies, we again could be drilling in empty space because the body was in that exact position yesterday, but it's not there today. Or if we got the location in relationship to the body itself accurate, but the actual body is in another space, again, there's a problem. And so we want, those three dimensions. We want the space-time dimension. And the time dimension is a really interesting one because it's unique to the individual in many cases. We've got certain things like the sun moving around the earth at a certain time. And so we can say that everyone in this country is, in light at this time, except for the fact that we now have artificial lights. So some people could be blocking the light out in a concrete room, or some people could be at night, at turning on electric lights. So it gets more and more relevant to engage with an individual in the height, width, space, time dimensions. And then there are cycles within the body, and so, we can look at measurements, and, we could break up the body, because now that we've got the body in a GPS time coordination, where we can say this is the space, time, depth, height, width of this body. So zero into here and here. There are different distinctions that are useful to understand. For example, the distinction of sterile and bacteria. Again, going back to the dentist drill. So, so it's useful to pin the body down, etc. And it's useful to do dentistry. I think everyone who's had a painful cavity or infection removed would say that's what we want. So that's whatever helps us do that is a useful model of reality. It's not reality, it's a useful model of reality. But then we have to get, distinctions such as is the dentist blade, the little grinding bit, is it sterile? Or does it contain some form of harmful bacteria that's going to immediately infect the thin walls of the cheek lining? Well, the thin walls of the cheek lining are a set of distinctions that on one hand are incredibly crude. I mean, are we talking about the left side, the right side? Are we talking about the little veins that run through, or the little membrane skin, or the veins that are bringing fresh blood in or bringing old blood out? Are we talking about this bit or that bit, where it's thick, where it's thin, the bit that's here, or the bit that's here, or the bit that's here, or the bit that's there? There's a million different bits. What are we actually talking about? And yet it's enough. We have a distinction, the thin lining of the cheek walls. First of all, we assume the inside. Secondly, we realize, a disease could touch any of those areas. Thirdly, we just look at it and it looks a little bit more tender than the outer skin. And so it seems like, that would be a porous area that if we induced some kind of a virus or bacteria, that it could easily penetrate the system. Because it's, that's why we don't eat stuff that we may be willing to hold, but we don't eat it. We don't put it in our mouth. So these are, I guess, examples of the distinction continuum, a model of looking at models that's useful. And what I want to suggest is that the level of optional distinction is one of the most powerful technologies for creating, for unlocking a good 90% of our potential is unlocked through effective models of intersecting human consciousness with a recipe of distinctions at the right zoom in and zoom out lens. And I say at the right zoom in and zoom out lens because of the factor of time. If we're too zoomed in, we say this atom, this space between this atom, this space between atoms. We could spend 4 years tracking the atoms from here to here, or we could just say the line between the ear and here, and it takes a second. And so getting that zoom in and out point in a way that does not cause unnecessary harm. It's no good if that's all the clarity given by a surgeon to a student, cut open the face from the line from the ear to there. The student cuts it open, and then the doctor says, well, no, not with a machete, with that scalpel, not with this knife, with that knife, not with a dirty blade, with a clean blade. And don't go all the way into the earlobe. What were you thinking? This is the point of the surgery, and try not and cut this lip here. Just go from right here to right here, because that's the most effective way to get in there and do this and that we need to do. And so this is the biggest area of human mastery and human incompetence. It's the technology of language, the technology of zooming in and zooming out, the technology of distinctions through language, the technology of models that elevate the distinctions that they elevate. I mean, and it's very important to understand that the models are not reality, that we never deal with reality. What we deal with is models of distinctions. And we make reality through the choice of our models, which lead to the choice of our measurements. Because, for example, if we have a model that says that you measure a body based on the discolorations of skin, and we say, okay, this is a bit because it's slightly pinker than this bit, this is a bit here, and we train the human eye to measure changes in skin color to such a degree that, much like a camera lens that can measure more than 1,000 different color hues, or a computer that can measure 256 million distinctions in color, that we start noticing that there's 80 to 90 visually different color shades on the face, and that each of those color shades represent a distinction that is measured as a way of relating to the body. And you can correlate almost any distinction technology with an object. Meaning, if you look at patterns in color with enough sophistication, there is almost certainly an underlying correlation where one can start to infer more and more stuff from those distinctions. One may be able to say, based on the intensity of color when one woke up, after learning that, when someone first gets out of bed, or maybe one can't tell when one woke up, but one can tell how much movement has gone on since one has been sedentary. One can tell how relaxing the dreams were. One can tell what the diet was. One can tell how much light exposure. And then if you start understanding and extrapolating from there, what's the probability that someone with this diet and this light exposure, what is the probability? We're not dealing with certainty, but you can create probable correlations based on data. We haven't done it, but if you analyze 100 million faces, if a computer analyzes 100 million faces and learns all of the historical correlation of that body over, or of all those people, when metadata is available to computers that, of a species, a computer will be able to look at a face and create statistical correlations to that face that are probability fields. And it will be useful if they are high probabilities. For example, if you can take a photo of your face and email it into a computer database, if you can do that, then you will be able to, AI computers can learn these technologies very, very, very fast, 24 hours a day, building corollary data. Now, if you get a response back that there is a 90% chance that, based on your face, that you're going to get a heart attack, let's say, based on the corollary data. And that the two things that you can change based on the corollary data is you can stop smoking and you can go for a walk every day. That those are the things, because if a computer has access to metadata over time, it's also going to look at divergent paths. Like, here's someone that had a face like yours until they were 28. Or here's 1 million people who had faces in your hue range where it was tight around here and done this and this, like here. Here's an area that it's going to be tight. So but at 30, this group of people stopped smoking and started doing walks, and their rate of skin cancer or whatever went down by 80%. But this group didn't change anything at age 30, and 90% of them developed cancer, and their faces continued to look like this. So you're in age 40, so you're in that, so you're in that group that hasn't done it yet. You're not walking yet, etc. And so you can share the profile information that seems most relevant to the corollary data. Now, probability fields are very, very powerful technologies. They're distinctions. And they can be very crude distinctions, but a computer can bring up distinctions that we don't pay attention to. For example, a computer might discover a toxicity in a chemical that we don't know is toxic, or that we don't know is toxic in combination, by noticing that 90% of the people who got sick in a certain disease walked by a factory containing this mix of chemicals within the last few years. And thus produce information that there is a high probability that a scientific study should be made on this or that area. Now, I'm getting off on this because it's such an exciting technology for artificial intelligence and in health and various areas. And I just realized that while doing this. So it's an exciting side drift. However, coming back to the issue of distinctions, what I'm ultimately getting at is there are huge blind spots in our culture, such as human relationships, where it's a crapshoot, and there's enormous unnecessary suffering and failure simply because we don't have the right science-based distinctions to know who and how to connect with on what basis. We have a certain amount of gene information, and so we know what creates attraction on a body level, but we don't have as much technology in the social, mental, human and spiritual arenas of connection to know who's going to bring out the best in one and who's going to crush someone for very predictable forces. And so we're moving into a terrain where computers are going to be able to generate patterns with no bandwidth limitation. And in the process of doing so, we're going to be able to either turn that into a basis for inducing sociopathic and traumatic behavior in a wide number of people and shaming and dissociating, or we're going to be able to come together and circle around and learn and grow and try and integrate that data in daily life and create a more vibrant and effective culture and community. But it is valuable to have technologies of language and distinction, and it is valuable to be educated in those distinctions so that we can zoom in to the level of science needed to make effective decisions. And effective decisions can be measured in probability fields, where we can see they made a good decision here, and they made a good decision here, and they made a good decision here. And it can arrive at an informed decision by someone like Peter Thiel, who comments of Elon Musk, "I would never bet against Elon because his probability field is too high." It's not that he won't be wrong. He will be. But his probability field is so high, it's not good to bet against him. So just a few thoughts on distinction, and I'll leave it at that.